Every Sunday, he cleaned the small church quietly. But nobody knew this humble volunteer had spent 30 years as a Navy chaplain, comforting sailors in their darkest hours. When tragedy struck the town, his true calling emerged. For 30 years, on ships, in hospitals, across the 7 seas, he had witnessed thousands of young sailors' final moments. He'd helped some make their last calls home, listened to others' final words. For some, he'd simply held their hand, letting them know they weren't alone. But now, in this small town, nobody knew who he really was, until that terrible accident happened. Because some gifts never fade, some callings never go silent. And sometimes, God places you exactly where you're needed most, when you're needed most. Welcome to The Last Stand. Do you remember someone in your life who gave you spiritual support, who stood by you during your darkest moments? Share in the comments what that person meant to you. William Hayes had been volunteering at St. Michael's Church in Cedar Valley for 5 years. At 68, he was average height, white-haired, always wearing a gentle smile. Every Sunday morning he'd arrive early, clean the church, arrange the flowers, and prepare for service. The townspeople loved him, but nobody knew much about his past. He'd say he was retired but wouldn't give details. He lived in a modest house, never wanting to be a burden on anyone. But William had qualities that went unnoticed. The professionalism he showed during hospital visits, his approach to grieving families, the calm he displayed during crisis moments. These were skills beyond those of an ordinary volunteer. William's way of speaking also caught attention. When talking with people, he especially used his listening skills. He didn't just lend an ear, he seemed to weigh every word, understand every emotion as he listened. During funeral services at the church, William's transformation became most apparent. His approach to grieving families, the words he spoke to them, the comfort he provided, these were like those of an experienced spiritual counselor. How does he understand pain so well? Pastor Johnson had asked himself once. William had just smiled and said, "I guess age brings wisdom." But the depth in his eyes came from something else entirely. His most striking quality was the connection he formed with young people. Especially when talking with folks aged 18-25, it was like he spoke their language. He understood their anxieties, fears, and dreams remarkably well. William had certain habits that nobody could explain. For instance, he'd wake up early every morning and look toward the east. Cedar Valley wasn't on the coast, but William would face east each morning and think for long periods. When William encountered people in town with military backgrounds, his demeanor would change. He'd listen more carefully, approach them with greater understanding. It was like he knew exactly what they'd been through. Once, a Navy retiree had come to town. When William spoke with him, the words he used, the questions he asked showed deep knowledge about military life. "Did you ever serve in the military?" the retired sailor had asked. William had just smiled and said, "Everyone has a past." A few people who'd been guests in William's home had noticed something strange. There were no photographs in the house. No traces of his old life, family, or past. It was as if he'd come into existence 5 years ago. But his bookshelf was noteworthy. Alongside theology books, there were volumes on military history, naval affairs, and war psychology. Nobody had dared ask why he read these. Sometimes they'd see William praying alone in the church, and these weren't ordinary prayers. It seemed like he was praying for very specific people. Sometimes tears would stream down his face. Pastor Johnson had once asked William, "Who are you praying so deeply for?" William had replied, "For friends who are no longer with me." But he hadn't explained which friends. The night of March 15th would become the darkest night in Cedar Valley's history. On the main highway outside town, a horrific traffic accident occurred. A young couple's car had skidded on the icy road and crashed into a tree. William was among the first to arrive at the scene. As soon as he heard about the accident, he rushed from his home and ran to the crash site. What he saw there deeply affected everyone. The young couple in the car was severely injured, 23-year-old Michael and 21-year-old Sarah. They were newlyweds with plans for life ahead. Now both were fighting for their lives. The 15 minutes before the ambulance arrived were critical. And in those 15 minutes, William did something very special. William knelt beside Michael. The young man was losing consciousness, struggling to breathe. William took his hand and began to speak. "Michael, can you hear me?" "I'm William. I'm here with you, son. You're not alone." There was fear in Michael's eyes. He could feel death approaching. William looked into his eyes and spoke in a very calm voice. "Don't be afraid, Michael. You're a good kid. You love Sarah so much, and she loves you. That love will never end. No matter what happens, love is stronger than anything else." Meanwhile, Sarah's condition was worse. William moved to Sarah's side and took her hand too. "Sarah, sweetheart, I'm here. Do you want to talk to your family?" Sarah barely managed to nod. William immediately pulled out his phone and called Sarah's family. He held the phone to Sarah's ear. When her parents heard their daughter's voice, they began to cry. Sarah managed to say, "Mom, Dad, I love you." Meanwhile, Michael's condition was worsening. William turned to him and gripped his hand tightly. "Michael, your life was beautiful, wasn't it? The moments you spent with Sarah, loving your family, being kind to people, these things never disappear. You lived a good life, son." As Michael looked at William, the fear in his eyes began to fade. He seemed to sense that someone very experienced and trustworthy was beside him. "God is waiting for you, Michael. Don't be afraid. Walk toward the light. I'll take care of Sarah here. Don't worry." Michael was squeezing William's hand as he took his last breath. He didn't die alone. When the ambulance arrived, Sarah was still alive but in critical condition. William accompanied her to the ambulance. "Sarah, keep fighting, sweetheart. Michael is waiting for you. But your time hasn't come yet. You still have things to do." At the hospital, William also comforted Sarah's family. He told them about Michael's final moments, how he wasn't afraid, how he died in peace. Sarah fought for 3 days. William was at the hospital beside her every day. He talked with her family, prayed, gave hope. On the 3rd day, Sarah also lost her life. But in her final moments, she wasn't alone. William was there. The death of the young couple deeply affected the entire town. Cedar Valley was a small town where everyone knew each other. Michael and Sarah's deaths plunged everyone into mourning. The young couple's families were most affected. But strangely, William's presence gave them great comfort. The care and compassion William had shown Michael and Sarah in their final moments had touched everyone. "I've never seen anything like it," said firefighter Tom, who was at the accident scene. William acted like he'd been doing this job for years. He was like a professional spiritual counselor. Pastor Johnson was also amazed. "I didn't know William was so experienced. It was like he'd encountered such situations thousands of times." Michael and Sarah's funeral service was held at St. Michael's Church. The entire town had come. William took an active role in organizing the ceremony. But at the funeral, William's behavior drew even more attention. He knew funeral protocol very well. He knew how to support families, how to manage the grieving process, how to comfort people. "Who is this man?" asked a doctor who had recently moved to town. "I've never seen anyone so experienced. It's like he'd lived intimately with death for years." After the funeral service, people began asking William questions. But he gave his usual modest answers. "Experience that comes with age," he'd say. "A person sees a lot in life." A week after the funeral, an unexpected visitor came to town. A man in his mid-50s, formally dressed. He said he'd come from a Navy base. The man's name was Commander Robert Jackson. He was looking for William. "I'm looking for Chaplain Hayes," he told Pastor Johnson. "We served together in the Navy for 30 years. I learned he was here." Pastor Johnson was surprised. "Chaplain? William is a chaplain? Don't you know? William Hayes was one of the Navy's most experienced chaplains. He served for 30 years. Our paths crossed on the USS Nimitz. I'll never forget it." Commander Jackson found William at St. Michael's Church. When William saw him, he wasn't surprised. It was as if he'd been expecting his arrival. "Hello, Robert," he said calmly. "How are you?" "I'm fine, Bill. But I was surprised when I heard you were here. How's retirement going?" The two sat in the church and talked. Pastor Johnson and several church members were also listening. "This man," said Commander Jackson, "served as a Navy chaplain for 30 years. He was everywhere from Vietnam to Iraq to Afghanistan. He comforted thousands of sailors in their final moments." William was still silent. Commander Jackson continued, "Bill, do you remember? The USS Cole attack. 17 sailors were killed. You spoke with their families for 48 hours straight without stopping. You told them about each one's final moments, gave them comfort. William finally began to speak. There was weariness in his voice, but also peace. Yes, I served for 30 years. I joined the Navy in 1975, retired in 2005. I served in the Chaplain Corps. The people in the church held their breath. William continued, I started in Vietnam. I saw young sailors die. I listened to their last words. I wrote letters to their families. This job isn't easy, but someone has to do it. Why didn't you ever tell us? Asked Pastor Johnson. Because I was retired. That life was over for me. I was trying to live a peaceful life here. But, said Commander Jackson, your behavior during Michael and Sarah's deaths. I saw the old bill there. I saw Chaplain Hayes. William nodded. Some things never change, Robert. When people need help, I have to be there. It's not a duty, it's a calling. In 30 years, how many people did you accompany in their final moments? Asked one of the church members. William thought for a long time. I don't remember the exact number. Maybe thousands. Each one was very special. Each one had a story. Didn't you ever struggle? Did you ever think you couldn't handle it? Of course I struggled, but when I saw the fear in those young sailors' eyes, I had no choice but to help them. Commander Jackson stood up. Bill, I brought you a message from the Navy. Admiral Peterson really wants to see you. William was surprised. Why? Because there's still a need for you. Young sailors are still dying. Families are still grieving. Your experience, your knowledge, is still very valuable. I'm retired, Robert. But your calling never ended. The care you showed Michael and Sarah proves that. You're still a chaplain, Bill. Everyone in the church was looking at William. At that moment, how the town saw him had changed. He was no longer just a church volunteer. He was a hero who had served for 30 years, touching thousands of lives. What will you do, Bill? Asked Pastor Johnson. William thought for a long time. Then he looked at the church, at the townspeople. My place is here, he said. These people welcomed me. I want to serve them. But the Navy will always be with me. But now my duty is here, to serve the people of Cedar Valley. Commander Jackson smiled. I knew you'd say that. You were always like this. You always put people before yourself. From that day forward, William's role in town changed. He was no longer just a volunteer, but officially the church chaplain. Pastor Johnson had asked him to take on this role. Elderly people in town began coming to him. War veterans, grieving families, young people facing life crises. William listened to them all, helped them all. The most important thing I learned in 30 years in the Navy, he'd say, is how important it is to be there for people in their most difficult moments. Nobody should die alone. Michael and Sarah's families had also become very close to William. They said that thanks to him, they were able to get through their grief more easily. Today, William Hayes still lives in Cedar Valley. He's 73 but still active. Every Sunday he gives sermons at church, makes hospital visits, helps anyone in need. The townspeople now know who he is, but this hasn't changed anything. He's still the same modest, helpful Uncle William. Only now people address him as Chaplain Hayes. And he's proud to carry that title. If these powerful stories appeal to you too, don't forget to subscribe to the Last Stand channel. We'll continue to bring you more hero stories every week. William Hayes' story teaches us this: true service never ends. A true calling never goes silent. And sometimes the greatest heroes continue to serve in the most ordinary places, in the most humble ways. Being there for people in their most difficult moments isn't just a duty, it's a privilege, says William. Because the comfort you give in those moments, the compassion you show, becomes the most precious gift of their lives.